So, The Wild Robot is the latest film from DreamWorks Animation. And even though it's based on a book, I think this is definitely one of DreamWorks, definitely one of like their better films. And I'm not just saying that just because it's a film that's not a sequel, and it actually has like some, it looks gorgeous and it has a more original story. But I think what I love so much about this film is just that its script is so richly dense, and it's still such a simplistic story for kids to enjoy and families to enjoy. But there are so many thematic layers to it that I think the more that I watch this film, and let's face it, if you're a parent, you're going to end up watching a lot of animated films over and over. And this is honestly a film that I wouldn't mind on repeated viewings, just because I feel like there's a whole bunch of angles that are covered in it that you just don't see in a lot of animated films. Like maybe this is just because after coming off of Inside Out 2, which more or less felt like a retread, and Despicable Me 4, which is mostly just resting on its laurels, but The Wild Robot actually feels like it has a brilliant script to match its brilliant visuals. So, and the thing is, like, there's a lot going on, but it's a fairly easy story to understand. It's about this robot dumped in the wild, goes by Roz as a nickname, voiced by Lupita Nyong'o, and she's just a robot looking for a purpose. She figures that, she's meant to serve humans, but there are no humans on the island that she's landed on. So there's a lot of questions, like, what is my purpose? If I don't have any purpose, do I just go back to where I was sent from? What do I end up doing? So she ends up staying on the island, trying to understand the animals. Eventually she learns to speak all the different languages of the animals, and she decides that after an accident, she will make it her life's work to raise a goose, who she names Bright Bill, voiced by Kit Connor. And she comes to realize that Bright Bill is not like the other geese. He's basically considered like the runt, and they're not sure if, he'll be able to survive in the wild. So Roz basically makes it her goal in life to raise this goose so that, that this goose can survive and, just keep the nature cycle going, even though they don't really mention the nature cycle. It's just, they reduce it to a simplicity here of just a robot raising a goose. But of course, from that premise alone, you've got a lot to work with there. You've got like the single parent aspect. You've got that angle of feeling that you don't belong, with like a little bit of like the ugly duckling thing going on. And there are a few obvious jokes that come with that. In particular, Roz gets some parenting advice from a possum called Pinktail, voiced by Catherine O'Hara. And she offers like some sage advice, but not a lot. And the same goes for another companion Roz gains along the way, a fox called Fink, who is voiced by Pedro Pascal, who's more or less just using Roz to kind of like find an easy way to get food out in the wild, but he still offers a little bit of support here and there. So Roz is given support and some advice, but not the best advice and not a lot of support from this environment where animals hunt each other and want to kill each other. And that was something I really loved about like the first act of this film. Like the first act of this film it's not just dark, it's darkly comedic because it leans into the bluntness that would happen within nature, where all these different animals wouldn't exactly live in harmony. They would try to hunt and kill each other, and not all of them would survive. In fact, the event that happens that leads Roz to Bright Bill and is an accident that has some fatal mistakes to it. So so there's very much a lot of earnestness going on in that first act. And it kind of runs, it could run the risk of being cynical, but I feel like there's just enough of that knowing dark humor about the situation so that when we inevitably get to the very sincere and heartfelt moments where Roz connects more with Bright Bill and raises this goose up, and then kind of has to learn to like let go of like, this person, not a person, a goose that this robot has raised is not an easy thing. And I love how the film kind of lingers on moments where it feels like the film might end there. Like, because at one point, Roz is successful in inevitably, after training Bright Bill this whole time, is to get him up in the air, and she succeeds at that. But after that, there's still a little bit more time left in the film, like enough room for an entire act, and they address a lot more with that as the film goes on. Like then you start addressing like the empty nest syndrome, and finding a purpose in life when you feel like you've gotten older and that you don't quite belong after you've sacrificed so much of your body to raising someone. So there's a lot of relatable aspects for the parents in there, but don't worry, they don't reduce it all to just like the little winking parent jokes. And I think the benefit of the film having so many themes like that is that it never feels like it's just resting on like a particular type of joke, or like a familiar scenario. Like there are a few that get evoked with Pinktail, because she has a bunch of other possum babies that she raises, and she makes some dark humor about, I only have a few, some might die, and if they do die, whatever. So, but I like the fact that the single parenting aspect comes through a little bit more subtly, just because there's so much else going on. At the same time, I think narrowing the story to Roz raising Bright Bill gives the film a lot of room to like explore a few aspects, but not linger too much on them and not explain too much of it. Like, of course, because then there's the obvious question. Well, okay, if Roz landed on an island where there is no humans, what happened to the humans in this world? And the film does answer this, but in a way where it's not just like where it's not like entirely exposition driven. So there's no like moment in like like in Wall-E where they explain exactly what happened to Earth. It's one of those things that it's more visually communicated. So like there's a moment where Bright Bill finally takes off with a flight of geese, and one of the places that he flies over is I believe like the Golden Gate Bridge. And once he flies over that, and you see that it's consumed by water and whales are going over it, it's like, yeah, okay, I get it. I see where this is going, and they don't slow down to explain that. They do show off how like the humans have kind of closed off themselves in these worlds where robots will do everything for them, and it's kind of like it's a dystopian environment for like the humans where they have to close themselves off from the world, but it's also like a world where it feels like nature has kind of taken over more, because now this entire island can just like flourish on its own without any human involvement. Well, with the exception of Roz coming into play here. And like there's so much to cover this film, but like one of the aspects that I think is most important to this film is just leaning into the weirdness, because they do bring up, yes, how Bright Bill is a runt, but also that Roz is not like the other robots, and that she is kind of like damaged herself, and they find her defective, that she's using her abilities to contact to speak with animals, which is not something that her type of robot design does. And she's deemed as someone who needs to be changed, who needs to be like, stripped of her data and reset to be more normal. And that comes in the form of the film's only antagonist of another robot called Vantra, voiced by Stephanie Sue. And I love how they reserve this film more for the end, just to like stress the thematic point, instead of like making it a kind of like cat and mouse chase for most of the film of just like this one evil robot trying to chase after Roz for the whole time. And I think, yeah, like it helps to have just so much going on thematically that, you never get bored with the film, and you're always intrigued to see where it goes next and what it wants to explore. This is very much true with the supporting cast, which I feel are very much in their element here. They're used just enough where you never get tired of them, and they never feel like they're just one simple gimmick that you just grow bored with. In particular, like highlights here are like Bill Nighy voicing the Elder Goose called Longneck, who more or less just kind of gives Bright Bill a little bit more guidance, to get up in the air, as well as Roz as well. You have Mark Hamill playing a bear called Thorn. You have Matt Berry playing Paddler, and just it's Matt Berry doing the voice he usually does, and then Ving Rhames as Thunderbolt the Falcon, who trains Bright Bill. So yeah, there's a lot going on within this environment. And speaking of the environment, it looks so lush and beautiful. I love just like the deep colors that they use for like the forest, like all the deep greens, and how when like a forest fire breaks out, there's all these like popping pinks and purples and blues that come about. And then just like the design of like the juxtaposed robot, which, you know, you get a little bit of like Castle in the Sky vibes with like the simplistic face and the long arms and the round body, but it never feels like it's being like too derivative. There's never a moment where it feels like, oh, okay, it's more or less trying to play off this other animated film or this sci-fi aspect. It never feels like it's being that winking for like to like kind of like throw the adult audience a bone, because they really don't have to, because the thematic elements here are so strong and layered and numerous that it'd be impossible for an adult to be bored with this film, just because there's so much to consider with what goes on within like this beautiful animation. So like there's enough there within the script that I think most adults will appreciate, just like the very well written story. While a lot of the kids will be able to like easily, you know, find the fun to be had with like a robot raising a goose, and not look too much more deep into it than that. But of course, you know, like I said, they will watch this film more, and you know, they're probably going to grow up with it, and they're probably going to come back to it and be like, wow, there's a lot more happening in this film than I first thought when I saw it as a kid. So I'd be very interested to see what happens with the kids who grew up with this film and then return to it years later to find out, you know, yeah, there's more going on than just the robot goose story. Just fantastic direction here from Chris Sanders, which I don't think, you know, I don't think much has to be said about Sanders for, you know, his history of like, you know, working on other DreamWorks films, and, you know, like particularly How to Train Your Dragon. That should be enough of a selling point there. But yeah, like this is top tier DreamWorks. This is, you know, it's beautiful animation. It's a very richly thematic script. It's got some great performances, and it just has like a very genuine nature to it, where it doesn't feel like it's falling back on like pop culture nods or aping off, or even just aping off other animated films. It does feel like it's in its own element, and doing its own thing in a way that, you know, most mainstream animated films don't tend to do. You do tend to see this type of work within a lot more like independent animated films, but for this type of story to come out of DreamWorks, just looking as amazing as it does and playing as great as it does, it's just fantastic. This is, I dare say, like this is up there with probably like my favorite DreamWorks animated film, and easily like I think my favorite Chris Sanders film. So yeah, the Wild Robot is a must watch animated film from DreamWorks.